Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me closely. Most people think transformation takes years. Science says it starts in 24 hours, 1 day week, 1 month. That's all it takes to build a new you. In just 1 day, you can begin the process of transforming who you are. That might sound unrealistic, but it's not. The human brain is constantly scanning for signals, looking for cues in your behavior and your environment that suggest change is happening. And when it detects even the smallest shift, it starts preparing for adaptation. That's how the nervous system works. It's built to notice novelty, to respond to change, and to rewire in response to repeated experience. So when you decide to take one clear action today, something small, deliberate, and different, you send a powerful signal to your brain. We're moving in a new direction. This doesn't require a massive overhaul of your life. You don't need a 10-step plan or a list of goals. What matters is that you choose something intentional, something that breaks the inertia of your current state. For example, wake up an hour earlier than usual, skipping sugar for 1 day, walking outside for 20 minutes with no phone, or writing down your intentions instead of scrolling aimlessly in the morning. These may seem like small things, but biologically, they are anything but small, because what you're doing is creating contrast. And contrast is one of the strongest triggers for attention and plasticity in the brain. When you step outside of your usual habits, your brain takes notice. It shifts into a state of alertness. That alertness is accompanied by the release of neuromodulators, chemicals like norepinephrine and acetylcholine, that heighten your focus and mark the moment as important. These chemicals tag the experience and say, this matters. Let's remember this. This is the gateway to change. That's how neuroplasticity begins out not with grand gestures, but with specific, repeated signals that break routine and imply direction. Even just deciding to sit in silence for 10 minutes without distraction sends a powerful message to your nervous system. You're no longer passively drifting through your environment. You're becoming deliberate, and that shift from passive to intentional is the first real step in any transformation. From a neuroscience perspective, the brain responds not just to what happens, but to the meaning you assign to what happens. If you do something small and tell yourself, this is the first step, your brain will register it that way. And once you've done it, you're no longer thinking about change. You're participating in it. What matters next is how you respond afterward. If you celebrate the effort, even a little, you enhance the learning. You release dopamine, not because you succeeded in changing everything, but because you took action. And that's the reward system doing its job. The reward system doesn't just respond to outcomes. It can be trained to respond to effort. This is crucial because when your brain starts to associate effort with reward, you become someone who is motivated not by results, but by the process itself. That's sustainable motivation. This is why the first day of any change is the most important, not because of what it accomplishes externally, but because of what it initiates internally. You're not just changing your behavior. You're teaching your brain to believe that change is possible. You're installing the foundation of a new identity, one small action at a time. And the moment you do that, momentum starts to build. The nervous system starts to tune itself to this new path. And as long as you stay consistent, even in tiny ways, your brain will follow. So yes, 1 day matters. One intentional act matters. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need the whole future is mapped out. You just need to take one step that your brain can recognize as meaningful. That one action becomes the first domino in a chain reaction. And if you do it right, your entire system, your attention, your motivation, your energy will begin to align with that new signal, not because you forced it, but because you directed it. And that's the real secret to change. Once you've taken the first intentional step toward change, the next crucial phase begins repetition. What you do for 1 day starts the signal. What you do consistently for a week begins to form a pattern, and patterns are what the brain uses to build stability. The nervous system thrives on consistency. When you repeat a behavior daily for 7 days, you're sending a strong, repeated message to your brain. This is not a one-time event. This is who we're becoming. And your brain listens. It begins to shift from reacting to change to expecting it. In neuroscience, there's a principle that says neurons that fire together wire together. This means that the more a neural circuit is activated through thought, behavior, or experience, the stronger and more automatic it becomes. During the first week of any new habit or behavior, your brain is literally carving out a new pathway. Every repetition strengthens it. Every day that you show up reinforces it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to feel motivated every time. What matters is that you repeat the behavior often enough that your brain starts to anticipate it, to rely on it. At the same time, your internal reward system is being retrained. When you complete a habit once, you may feel a spark of pride or accomplishment. But when you complete it for a second, third, and fourth time, your brain starts to associate that action with a consistent release of dopamine, a chemical linked to motivation and forward movement. Dopamine is not just about pleasure. It's about the pursuit. It signals progress. So when you continue to act consistently over the span of a week, you're telling your brain there is something worth pursuing here. That's how motivation becomes sustainable. Not through hype, but through consistency. There's also something powerful that happens in your identity during this phase. In the beginning, you're just trying to act differently. But by the end of the first week, your internal dialogue starts to shift. You're no longer saying, I'm trying to be someone who does this. You start to think, this is part of who I am now. That shift might be subtle, but it's critical because your identity is formed largely by what you consistently do. The brain takes note of repeated actions and uses them to define your self-image. So if you wake up early 7 days in a row, you begin to see yourself as someone who wakes up early. If you exercise even briefly every day, you start to view yourself as someone who moves their body regularly. And this shift in self-perception reinforces the behavior further. It becomes easier to continue because you're no longer fighting against your old self. You're reinforcing your new one. The 7-day window is also a test. It exposes the resistance points. Maybe day 3 feels hard. Maybe day 5, your old habits try to pull you back. That's normal. In fact, it's expected. But those moments are actually what build strength in the system. Every time you overcome resistance, even in a small way, you train your brain to tolerate discomfort and persist. That's one of the most valuable adaptations you can develop. You become more resilient, more focused, and more connected to the process than you were at the start. After a week, the behavior is no longer foreign. It starts to feel familiar. Your brain becomes more efficient at executing it. The cognitive load decreases. You don't have to convince yourself to do it. You simply do. And once that level of ease begins to settle in, you're ready to move into the next phase, deeper identity change. But none of that happens without this critical week of repetition. This is the part where you build the structure. 1 week may seem like a short time, but when used deliberately, it can lay the neurological and psychological foundation for long-term transformation. It turns a single moment of change into a consistent signal of progress. After 1 day, you've sent a signal. After 1 week, you've created a pattern. But it's after 1 month that real transformation starts to take hold, not just in what you do, but in who you believe you are. 30 days is enough time for your brain to begin recognizing a new behavior as part of your identity. This isn't just about habit. It's about shifting the story you tell yourself and the expectations your nervous system builds around that story. You're not just trying anymore. You're living it. The behavior is no longer an interruption to your routine. It becomes the routine. Your brain is constantly in the process of forming what's known as predictive models. These models help you navigate life efficiently. They're based on past experiences and regular behaviors, and they create expectations for how you'll act, how you'll feel, and even what kind of person you are. In the first few days of a new behavior, your brain treats it as an outlier. After a week, it begins to consider it a possible pattern. But after a month, it starts predicting that this behavior will happen again, and it adjusts accordingly. That's how identity change begins, not by declaration, but by repetition. This process is deeply biological. With consistent repetition over 30 days, you begin reinforcing a network of neurons so often that the activity becomes more automatic, more energy efficient. This is how habits become second nature. But it's not just about efficiency, it's also about emotional investment. After a month, there's emotional weight behind the effort. You've spent time, energy, and focus on something that didn't exist before. That investment matters to your brain. It becomes harder to abandon because your system is now tied to it. There's a psychological cost to quitting. That's how momentum protects you. You give it. You begin to identify with the process. And when you identify with something, you protect it. It's also in this stage, between 3 and 4 weeks, that subtle but powerful shifts happen in your internal dialogue. You begin thinking in alignment with the person you've been acting as. Instead of forcing yourself to stay consistent, you begin asking different questions. How can I improve this? How can I go deeper? What's the next layer? This curiosity is a sign of integration. You're no longer an outsider trying to install a new habit. You've become someone who owns it. This doesn't mean you won't face resistance or distraction. But the difference now is your relationship with those obstacles has changed. Early on, resistance feels like a wall. After a month, resistance feels like a bump in the road, something to be navigated, not something that stops you. That's because you've developed internal proof. You've seen what you're capable of. You've seen yourself follow through, created a baseline of trust with yourself. And self-trust is one of the most powerful forces behind long transformation. There's also a change in your nervous system that's worth noting. After 30 days of consistent behavior, especially if that behavior includes movement, attention, reflection, or discipline, you start to experience improved regulation. This means your ability to handle stress, focus your mind, and reset after setbacks improves. Your nervous system becomes more adaptable. You don't just perform better, you recover faster. This is a biological reward for your consistency, and it reinforces the identity of someone who's in control. By the time you reach the 1-month mark, what was effortful has begun to feel natural. And here's what's most important. You've proven to your brain that you are not fixed. You're adaptable. You're capable of rewiring yourself through intention and action. That's what real identity change looks like. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be consistent. One day begins the signal. 1 week creates the pattern. But 1 month, one honest, consistent month, can make you someone new. And once that identity starts to take root, the possibilities begin to multiply. Dopamine is often misunderstood. Most people think it's about pleasure, that it only shows up when you get what you want. But the truth is, dopamine is not primarily about reward. It's about motivation. It's the molecule that tells your brain, keep going. You're making progress. Understanding how dopamine works is one of the most important things you can do if you want to create lasting change. Because once you learn to use it properly, you can train your brain to enjoy the process, not just the outcome. Every time you pursue something meaningful, whether it's a workout, a new habit, or learning a skill, your brain releases dopamine, not because you've succeeded, but because you're in pursuit. This is key. Dopamine is what makes the pursuit feel good. It's what gives you that internal sense of drive and forward momentum. And when you start linking dopamine to your efforts rather than the results, you create a sustainable engine for transformation. Here's how that works in your daily life. Let's say you decide to build a new habit, something small, like writing for 10 minutes each morning or going for a walk after dinner. If you wait until you've written a book or lost weight to feel good, you're relying on distant outcomes to give you energy. That's fragile. It creates long stretches of effort without reward, which leads to burnout and quitting. But if you shift your mindset, if you say, I'm proud I showed up today, or that walk was a win, you train your brain to release dopamine during the effort. That's powerful. It means the journey itself starts to feel rewarding. This isn't just positive thinking. It's neuroscience. Your brain is constantly looking for feedback. It wants to know, are we doing something worthwhile? If you wait for external validation, the feedback is delayed. But if you generate internal validation by acknowledging your effort, consistency, or even your struggle, you create an immediate feedback loop. And that feedback loop tells your brain, this matters. Keep going. Over time, the behavior becomes reinforced. You begin to crave the process because your brain has learned to associate it with satisfaction. There's also a biological benefit to this approach. Dopamine interacts with other brain chemicals like norepinephrine and serotonin to regulate your mood, focus, and energy. When dopamine is released in healthy, moderate amounts during effort, it improves your ability to stay focused and emotionally balanced. You become more resilient. You're less dependent on willpower because your brain has linked the behavior to its own internal reward system. Another critical aspect of dopamine is that it's tied to go expectation. And when you expect a reward and it doesn't come, dopamine levels crash. That crash can cause frustration, discouragement, and even depression. This is why it's dangerous to focus only on external rewards. They're unpredictable. But effort, that's under your control. You can always choose to show up. You can always decide to do the work. And if you link dopamine to that choice, to the act of showing up, you never have to suffer through a crash. You stay balanced. You stay energized. This also explains why small wins are so powerful. Every time you complete a meaningful task, even if it's tiny, your brain gets a hit of dopamine. It reinforces the action and makes it more likely you'll repeat it. That's how momentum builds, through a series of small, satisfying efforts that compound over time. You don't need a massive breakthrough to feel good. You just need a moment of progress. To build a new version of yourself, you need more than discipline. You need energy. And dopamine is that energy. It's the fuel source your brain uses to keep moving toward your goals. When you learn to control when and how that fuel is released, you gain control over your behavior, your mindset, and ultimately, your future. You stop relying on outside forces to push you. You become internally driven. You become self-reinforcing. And that's what makes change stick. The change that lasts doesn't come from motivation alone. It comes from structure. And the most effective structure you can build into your life is one that makes the new behavior easier than maintain to abandon. That means designing your environment, your routines, and even your thoughts in a way that supports the identity you're trying to create. Your brain is constantly scanning for cues, subtle signals in your surroundings, your habits, and your internal state that either align with your goals or pull you back into old patterns. When you take control of those cues, you reduce the friction of change. You stop relying on willpower and start relying on design. Structure begins with simplicity. You don't need a complicated system to support a new habit. In fact, the simpler the structure, the more likely it is to stick. For example, if your goal is to read every day, leave a book in plain sight, on your desk, on your pillow, or by your coffee mug. That small adjustment in your environment acts as a trigger. And once a trigger becomes reliable, your brain begins to associate that cue with the behavior. This is how routines are formed, not by willpower, but by predictability. When your environment makes the right behavior obvious and easy, it becomes the default choice. But structure isn't just physical. It's also internal. That means creating mental frameworks to support your behavior, especially when motivation is low. One powerful tool is what psychologists call implementation intentions. These are simple if-then statements. If I feel tired, I'll still do 5 minutes of stretching. If I get home late, I'll meditate for just 2 minutes. This kind of planning reduces decision fatigue. You don't have to negotiate with yourself every time conditions aren't ideal. You've already made the decision. Your brain appreciates certainty. It functions better when it doesn't have to keep debating. Another powerful form of structure is scheduling. When you assign a specific time and place to a behavior, it's far more likely to happen. Your brain treats scheduled tasks with more seriousness than vague intentions. I'll work out sometime today is far less effective than I'll work out at 6:30 a.m. in the living room. Why? Because specificity creates accountability, and accountability doesn't have to come from other people. It can come from consistency. If your nervous system knows that at a certain time you always form a certain action, it starts to prepare in advance. Your energy, focus, and readiness begin to align with that routine. Emotionally, structure provides something even more valuable, a sense of stability. Change is inherently destabilizing. When you're trying to become someone new, there's uncertainty involved. Your brain dislikes uncertainty. It interprets it as a threat. But structure, routine, ritual, consistency tells your brain, this is safe. This is predictable. That safety allows for deeper change. When your nervous system isn't busy reacting to chaos, it can invest more energy into adapting and growing. It's also worth noting that structure helps you recover faster when things go wrong. No transformation is linear. You will miss days. You will have setbacks. But if you've built structure, you don't fall as far. You know exactly where to return. You don't waste time figuring out how to get back on track. The track is still there. That's the beauty of structure. It becomes your anchor. The deeper truth is that every successful transformation is built on systems, not emotion. Motivation may get you started, but systems are what carry you through. The stronger your structure, the less energy you waste on decision-making, hesitation, or distraction. You stop wondering what to do next. You simply follow the path you've built. And the more often you follow that path, the more you believe in it. Eventually, that structure doesn't just support the new you. It becomes part of the new you. It shapes how you think, how you feel, and how you act. And that's how change becomes permanent. The final and most powerful step in becoming a new version of yourself is consistency over time. This is where real transformation happens. Not just change that fades after a few weeks, but change that becomes permanent, ingrained in your identity, and automatic in your behavior. You started with a single day to send a signal. You built a week of repetition to form a pattern. You used a month to establish a foundation. But now the goal is to maintain that progress without burning out, without second guessing, and without reverting. This is where consistency becomes your greatest ally. There's a common misunderstanding that success comes from massive action, but in reality, it comes from repeated small actions done over time. Your brain and nervous system are not built for intensity without structure. They're built for adaptation through repetition. And the longer you maintain a consistent pattern of action, the more your brain adapts to make that behavior efficient, automatic, and effortless. It's no longer something you have to force. It becomes part of your default operating system. What drives long-term consistency isn't perfection. It's resilience. It's the ability to keep going even when things aren't ideal. There will be days when you feel tired, unmotivated, or distracted. That's normal. What matters is that you have a minimum baseline you always return to, even if it's just doing a shorter version of your habit. 5 minutes of focus, 10 minutes of movement. You're keeping the streak alive. This maintains the neural pathways you've built. And more importantly, it tells your identity, this is still who I am. Well, your nervous system thrives on patterns. The more regular and predictable your behaviors are, the less energy your brain has to use to execute them. Think of brushing your teeth. You don't negotiate with yourself every morning. You just do it. Why? Because the action is wired into your identity and reinforced by years of consistency. That's the same effect you want for your new behaviors. When you do something consistently for weeks and months, it begins to exist in the background of your mind. It stops being something you think hours about and starts being something you think with. It becomes a lens through which you approach your life. There's also a biochemical advantage to long-term consistency. Over time, your body becomes more efficient at releasing and regulating neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and acetylcholine in response to your habits. Your focus improves. Your motivation becomes more stable. You begin to enter flow states more easily because your brain has developed a rhythm, and that rhythm creates momentum. The longer you stay consistent, the more you build what scientists call automaticity, the ability to perform a behavior with little to no conscious effort. Emotionally, long-term consistency builds confidence, not the shallow kind, but deep internalized confidence. You've seen yourself keep promises to yourself. You've built proof over time that you can show up even when it's hard. That self-trust becomes a foundation you can build anything on. It makes future goals easier to pursue because you already know how to follow through. But consistency doesn't mean rigidity. Life will change. Your schedule will shift. You may need to adjust how or when you do something. That's expected. The key is to be adaptable, risk without losing the core behavior. If your workout needs to be shorter, fine. If your meditation has to be at night instead of morning, adjust. What matters is that you maintain the habit in some form. Because that's how you tell your brain, no matter what changes, I stay on course. Over time, consistency rewires your identity. You no longer have to convince yourself that you're capable. You've already become the kind of person who does the work. And when that identity is locked in, the results take care of themselves. You don't just change temporarily, you stay changed. You become durable, grounded, focused, and everything around you begins to reflect the work you've done within.